In 1986, Sherry Ann Duncan was a 16-year-old girl living in Bangkok, Thailand. She was half Thai and half American, and studying in her local high school when her story would reveal the dark and seedy underbelly of a corrupt police force. That summer in 1986, on July 22nd, Sherry Ann was abducted as she left school, and only a few days later, after a frantic and desperate search, she was finally found. Sherry Ann was out in the wetlands of the Samut Prakan province, her life cut tragically short, her death the beginning of the unravelling of a long thread of lies, deceit and scandal. Less than a month after Sherry Ann had first gone missing, the Samut Prakan Police Department had arrested 5 men suspected to be her killers. These men were Winai Chaipanich, Krisea Ploliklum, Rungchalarm Kanok Chawa Kahi, Pitak Kakai, and Thawat Kit Prayun. Out of the 5 men arrested, only Winai Chaipanich was released, and the other 4 suspects were taken in for official questioning. Perhaps unsurprisingly, after spending some time alone with the police down at the station, all 4 suspects confessed to killing Sherry Ann and were then taken to court. There, their confessions and the testimony of a key eyewitness led to the convictions of all 4 men, and they were sentenced to death. They were then sent to prison to await their execution dates, and the rest of the world seemed to move on, thinking that justice had been served. But in 1995, Sherry Ann's case was flipped upside down. The Crime Suppression Division conducted a reinvestigation into Sherry Ann's case, and what they found would completely shatter the prosecution's evidence against the 4 men convicted for her murder. The key witness who testified against them had lied, and the men had only confessed to the crimes under duress from the police. The courts had sent another 4 lives in a long list of wrongly prosecuted people to prison, and Sherry Ann's real killer or killers were still on the loose. The courts and the police immediately sprung into action and tried to right the wrong that had been committed, but for some of the people involved in this case, it was too little, too late. By 1995, Rung Chalarm Kanok Chawan Nakahi had already died in jail. Pitak Kakai was already gravely ill with tuberculosis and died shortly after he was released. Thawat Kit Prayun died only 4 years later, leaving Krisea Plolikum to be the sole survivor out of the men who'd been wrongly convicted for Sherry Ann's murder. Krisea lived until 2012, but life for him after prison was certainly not without its complications. During his imprisonment, Krisea had suffered a spinal injury that had left him permanently disabled, meaning that he could never really return to the life he'd once known, even though the world now knew that he was innocent of the charges. But the release raised more than a few questions. If the 4 men who'd initially been charged and convicted for Sherry Ann's murder had only been scapegoats, then who had actually killed her? Later the same year that the men were released, 2 new suspects were arrested and convicted for the same crime. Only during their interviews, they dropped a name that must have even made the police shudder. It all started when a woman walked into the police station earlier that year, holding a watch and testifying that it had belonged to her husband. He, in turn, had taken it from a girl's body after he'd strangled her in a taxi and dumped her body along a busy road. The girl, the woman said, had been Sherry Ann Duncan. The police brought the husband in for questioning, and he quickly implicated 2 other people. The first had been his partner in crime, his own brother, and the second had been the person who'd hired them to kill Sherry Ann in the first place. The men claimed that they'd been hired by Suwabun Pat Pong Panit, the daughter of the actual owner of Thailand's red light district, Udom Pat Pong Panit, and that she had ordered them to kill Sherry Ann because she had been having an affair with Suwabun's husband. Their confessions were enough to convict both men. They were found guilty of Sherry Ann's murder, but the police knew that they would have to tread a little more carefully around Suwabun Pat Pong Panit. Suwabun, of course, denied the charges, but after hearing the evidence the police had collected against her, the criminal court found Suwabun guilty. She was sentenced to life in prison like her two accomplices, but to death, and was sent to prison to await her execution, just like the 4 men who'd been convicted of the same crime before her. Suwabun appealed against the verdict and eventually managed to take her case to the Supreme Court, where in 1999, in a highly controversial move, the court found her not guilty. They cited a lack of evidence against Suwabun and ordered for someone to be brought in for questioning who probably should have been brought in a long time before. That was Police Colonel Monkol Srifo, the man who'd been in charge of Sherry Ann's investigation to begin with. He'd already been dishonourably discharged from the police force for fabricating evidence against the 4 men originally convicted in Sherry Ann's case, and now he was wanted in court to stand trial for his crimes. But in 1999, even by 1995, when evidence of his crimes were first being uncovered, Monkol Srifo was already gone. He'd already emigrated to America, where the sullying of his reputation in Bangkok, his retroactive dismissal from the police force, and the freezing of his pension didn't affect him at all. The Thai authorities put in appeals for Monkol to be extradited back to Thailand to face charges, and while they were waiting for the answers to their appeals, the rumour mill began churning. Why had Monkol helped cover up the identities of Sherry Ann's real killers? Why had he risked his own reputation by fabricating evidence and beating confessions out of innocent people? He certainly wasn't the first police officer to do what he did, especially not at a time where the Thai police were notoriously corrupt and easy to bribe, but was there more to the story? Was it true that Suwabun was involved, and if that was the case, was this Monkol's way of trying to make an ally out of her very influential father? Some people claim that that was just it, and Monkol was trying to rub shoulders with the right kind of people, at least the rich kind, but some Thai newspapers at the time claimed a different story. According to them, during the course of the initial investigation into Sherry Ann's death, Monkol and Suwabun had begun having an affair. Maybe all of this had been Monkol's way of covering his new lover's tracks, maybe even his way of trying to impress her father, or maybe it had all been just rumours and speculation. Either way, it's been almost impossible to tell. Monkol was never extradited back to Thailand to answer for any of the charges, or to settle any of the allegations against him. This has left a country and Sherry Ann's parents without answers and without knowing the true depths of the cover-up around their daughter's murder. Her parents had originally promised each other that they wouldn't have Sherry Ann's remains cremated until everyone involved with her murder had been put behind bars, but in 2001 they decided it was time she was officially put to rest. Her cremation ceremony was held as part of the release for the documentary that was being made about their daughter and the dark secrets her death uncovered, but it was also a platform for others to speak out about how Sherry Ann's death had been the driving force behind a lot of political change in the country. Police Colonel Narat Sawetanant, the Director General of the Department of Rights and Liberty Protection, spoke at the ceremony. He said that wrongful convictions of the 4 men originally convicted for Sherry Ann's murder had led to improvements within the Thai judicial system itself. Their stories helped redefine standards and policies, but also led to significant changes in legislation for how suspects are also treated. He said, "The case is a first step in reforming the judicial system, and the state has to take responsibility for the lives of scapegoats in criminal cases." What Police Colonel Narat Sawetanant was referring to at the ceremony was a new piece of legislation that would be put into place the following year. This new law would make improvements in witness protection and the treatment of suspects and defendants while in police custody. But that wasn't all. It also put into place the concept of compensation for people who have been wrongfully convicted or mistreated by the judicial system, and this was something that directly affected the 4 men initially convicted of Sherry Ann's murder. In 2003, the civil court ordered the Royal Thai Police Office to pay 26 million baht, or $763,526 to Chryssia Polyculum and the other victims who had been wrongfully convicted. The ruling came too late for the other 3 men involved in this case, but their share of the compensation was given to their families instead, and at least showed that the Thai government was making steps to taking responsibility for the lives that had been torn apart in its name.